workers at Fukushima are all wearing dosimeters and are restricted to 250 millirems, and then they're out and they have to be replaced by someone else. 250 millirems is not going to harm them. The general public hasn't received anything like that kind of dose of radiation. They have not received enough radiation to be in the slightest harmful. So no one has died of radiation at Fukushima. Meanwhile, 28,000 people have died in a tsunami, yet the so-called nuclear disaster has got 100 times as much print and airtime as the tsunami did. And, 26,000 people died in a hydroelectric accident in China in 1975, and because it cut off all the supply lines, 100,000 people died of starvation after the accident because nobody could get food to them. And, the 125,000 people die in one hydroelectric accident. Nobody dies at Fukushima. 2 million people die from breathing fossil fuel fumes every year. Again, according to the World Health Organization's estimates, 2 million people a year. 1.3 million people die in vehicle accidents every year. Cars, mostly, also motorcycles and bicycles, but things that move and kill you. So over 1 million people die every year in car accidents and the like, mostly innocent pedestrians, passengers, and drivers who were not at fault. Even sometimes there's no one at fault in a vehicle accident. And yet, if you look at the whole nuclear industry's history from day one, 56 people have died, all in one accident at Chernobyl. That's about one per year over the 56-year period of nuclear technology. One person dead per year from nuclear, thousands from hydroelectric, thousands and millions from fossil fuels, millions from automobiles, and one from nuclear. So where is the logic in that in terms of risk analysis? Just talking about pure risk analysis. Ask the average person, okay, you have a choice. You can either go into a nuclear reactor today, or you can get in a car and go and drive out on the freeway all day. Which would you rather do? I'm going in the nuclear reactor because I have 1 million times more chance of dying on the road than I do inside a nuclear reactor, even inside it.
And Patrick, this brings us to one of the things that really gets your goat, having to do with the precautionary principle. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes.
Talk about that, because this is really where the rubber meets the road. It seems like part of the fear around nuclear is no information, just no knowledge about it. People are uneducated about it. A lot of people are scared of what they don't understand. And a lot of people don't understand what you're explaining and what you have written about. So that's one. But the other one is this precautionary principle that you talk about that seems to be a theme throughout the book. Explain it and explain to us why you take issue with it.
Well, the first thing is the precautionary principle is not actually a principle. A principle is something you do without failure. In other words, the precautionary principle says if there is a risk that something could go wrong with doing a certain thing or employing a certain technology, then you shouldn't do it because you don't want to take that risk. And so basically, if you applied the precautionary principle as a principle, you would not get out of bed in the morning because you're safer in the bed than you are getting up and risking falling and breaking your hip, or risking getting into a car and being in an accident, or just, subjecting yourself to the daily risk of life. That would be a principle. So therefore, it's not a principle. And actually the United Nations, in most of its documentation around this subject, has adopted the term precautionary approach, which is a very reasonable term, unlike precautionary principle, which is a useless term, basically, because it's kind of a zero tolerance term, and it doesn't make any sense because there's no, if you interpret it strictly, again, you wouldn't get out of bed, you wouldn't do anything that had any risk, and there is no such thing as a risk-free world or a risk-free life. The only time we are not at risk is when we're dead, and then it doesn't matter.
But hasn't the UN adopted a precautionary approach with respect to the UN panel on climate change? I mean, isn't that a lot of where they're coming from about it?
Yes, it is. But the good thing is they use the term approach. A precautionary approach is when you come to the curb and you want to cross the street, you look both ways to make sure there's not a risk of being run over and killed. That is the precautionary approach. But if you look both ways and you cannot see any present danger, then you will go across the street because it furthers you to do so, because there's an opportunity on the other side or something you want on the other side. So you go there, and halfway across the street, a meteor comes out of the sky or a bolt of lightning and kills you in the middle of the street. That was the risk you took. And you cannot eliminate that. It's impossible to have zero risk.
Not to get off the explanation that you're giving right now, but do you think that the UN has really looked both ways?
No, I don't. I think the IPCC is entirely politicized. It is what I call a powerful convergence of interests there. The IPCC is basically a union between the World Meteorological Organization, weathermen, and the United Nations Environment Program, environmentalists. It does not include the vast array of sciences that are also important with regard to climate change, such as astrophysics and geology and paleontology and solar sciences and all the other Earth sciences. And when they say there is an overwhelming consensus among climate scientists, they mean among us in our club. They have their own club. It's called the IPCC. And even though there are dissenters within the IPCC, they are suppressed. They are not allowed through into the summary for policymakers document, for example. They are actually suppressed. And there's evidence of that, lots of it. And, there's ClimateGate, which they whitewashed as well as they could. But when you get right down to the bottom of it, there was clear evidence that the so-called climate scientists were withholding information in a way that is not acceptable from a science point of view. They were manipulating information and hiding the decline and such. And they were also conspiring to destroy the reputation of their opposite people who didn't agree, of the skeptics. So no doubt about all of that. It is a highly politicized environment. And they've had to admit to so many errors, and yet it just steamrolls on. Because, again, there is this powerful convergence of interests. Environmentalists who want to get your money to save the world, politicians who want your vote because they're saving your children and their future world, businesses that want to look green and get government grants for doing green things, scientists and universities who want to get huge grants to do their work. You have to have climate change in your grant application these days if you want to get ahead. And media, last but not least, media that wants to create conflict, sensation, and fear in order to perpetuate stories that attract advertising revenue. And so all of those, and I've named most of society there, all of those elements have a common interest in promoting the fear of climate change. There was a great article in Greenpeace, it's a few years ago now, which is an internet-based, green, business-oriented website. The point of this essay was that political elites sort of create boogeymen to instill fear into the public in order to control them. And to make a long story short, this article postulated that in today's politics, the theory on the right is global terrorism to instill fear in people, and on the left is climate change to instill fear in people about their future and make them uneasy and therefore malleable in terms of controlling their behavior and their thoughts and
Understood.
Making them feel guilty. So guilt and fear are two of the prime motivators of human behavior, and climate change is perfect. First, you're fearful that the world is going to fry in hell, you will perish in flames, and secondly, you're guilty because you're the cause.
Also, the simulations that Al Gore did in his movie was so scary, and I never examined it because I believed it when I saw it. I mean, it's very hard to imagine the huge distortion that's taking place to do a movie like that. We want to look at leaders, whether they're political or not, as being truthful with us. But it wasn't until I really got into examining these simulations